Jace knelt under a flickering light in the bowels of a battered freighter, hands deep in a mess of tangled wires. The ship rocked with each gust of the electromagnetic storm outside, making his job all the more difficult. Space storms and faulty wiring, exactly how I wanted to spend my day, he muttered, twisting a loose cable back into place. Sparks flew for a moment, causing him to flinch, before the lights in the corridor flickered back on. He let out a sigh of relief and leaned back, wiping the sweat from his brow. The sound of the storm raging outside was a constant reminder that this ship was hanging on by a thread. Before he could even take a moment to relax, his communicator buzzed, and a familiar voice cut through the static. "Jace Donovan, I need you," said Lyra, her voice calm, composed, and as cold as the vacuum of space. Jace couldn't help but grin, sitting up straighter. "Lyra, well, look who's calling. I thought you'd forgotten about me, sweetheart. What's it been, a few months? No flowers, no chocolates, and now you just barge back into my life like nothing's happened." On the other end, Lyra's piercing gaze stared back at him through the hollow screen. Her blue skin almost glowed under the dim light, and her expression was as sharp as ever. "This isn't a social call, Donovan. I need your help." Jace wiped his hands on a dirty rag and leaned forward with a smirk. "You've said that already. I'm just curious what's so urgent that you'd need little old me to come to the rescue." Lyra's face didn't change, but her voice was laced with just a hint of impatience. "We don't have time for your games. I have a mission, and you're the only one capable of pulling it off." Jace leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Flattery. Always a good way to start. But I'm going to need more than I have a mission to leave this luxurious job I've got here." He motioned to the mess of wires and the flickering lights of the ship. "So what exactly are we talking about?" Lyra's eyes narrowed, the tension in her voice now clear. "Omega Outpost." The smirk fell from Jace's face as he raised an eyebrow. "Omega Outpost? You've got to be kidding me. That place is a fortress. What could you possibly want there?" "We need to infiltrate it," she said, her voice unwavering. "There's someone there we need to retrieve." Jace blinked, taken aback. "Someone? You mean a prisoner? You want me to break into Omega, one of the most secure places in the galaxy, and pull off a prison break? Who's this VIP you're risking everything for?" "That information is classified," Lyra said coolly, crossing her arms. "All you need to know is that their presence, or lack thereof, could disrupt the balance of power in the galaxy." Jace let out a low whistle, leaning forward again. Well, when you put it that way, I guess it sounds like a good time. But you've got to know that getting into Omega's one thing, getting out, that's another story." Lyra didn't flinch. "That's why I need you. You've done this kind of thing before. You're resourceful." Jace grinned, unable to resist the banter. "I like the way you say resourceful. But what's really in it for me? I'm not in the habit of throwing myself into a suicide mission without a good reason." "You'll be compensated generously," she replied, her voice sharp. Yeah, I figured credits were part of the deal," Jace said, waving his hand dismissively. "But what else? I mean, risking my neck deserves a little something extra, don't you think?" Lyra sighed, clearly losing patience. "What do you want, Donovan?" He pretended to think about it, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "How about dinner? Somewhere fancy, candlelight, no blasters allowed. You and me, a couple of drinks, and maybe a little conversation that doesn't involve people trying to kill us." Her eyes narrowed, but for the briefest moment, he thought he saw a smile tug at the corner of her lips. "If you survive, we'll talk about it." "That's a yes in my book," Jace said with a wink, leaning back in his chair again. "All right, princess. Count me in." As the eclipse broke through hyperspace, Jace couldn't help but feel a familiar sense of anticipation building in his chest. Omega Outpost. The name alone was enough to make even the most hardened smugglers think twice. It was a fortress, nestled deep in the lawless territories, guarded by some of the most ruthless syndicates in the galaxy. "So, I'm still not clear," Jace said, breaking the silence. "We're breaking into Omega to get a person out, but you haven't exactly told me who this person is. I get the whole classified angle, but if I'm risking my hide, I think I deserve to know. Lyra was seated beside him, her hands delicately navigating the ship's systems. She glanced at him but didn't break her focus. The person we're retrieving is crucial to maintaining stability in the galaxy. Their existence is a threat to certain factions. Chase raised an eyebrow. A threat? Sounds like my kind of guy. Lyra's lips tightened. It's more complicated than that. Of course it is, Jace said, leaning back in his seat with a sigh. Things are always complicated with you, aren't they? You ever think about a simple life? You know, one where people aren't constantly trying to kill you? She shot him a look. Do you? He chuckled. Fair point. But seriously, Omega's not a place you just stroll into. What's the plan? Lyra's voice was steady as ever. We'll land in one of the outer docks, bypass their security system, and infiltrate from the lower levels. Once inside, we'll locate the prisoner and extract them. It should be straightforward. Yeah, I've heard that before, Jace muttered. Every plan sounds great until things start blowing up. Lyra didn't respond, but Jace caught the faintest flicker of amusement in her eyes. He grinned. You know, I think you like this. The danger, the thrill. You pretend to be all serious and above it, but deep down, you're just like me. Lyra finally looked at him, her gaze steady. I don't do this for the thrill, Jace. I do it because it's necessary. Sure, Jace said, waving his hand. But maybe, just maybe, you're having a little fun along the way. She didn't answer, turning back to the holo display, but Jace swore he saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward. He leaned back, satisfied. That's what I thought. The ship hummed softly as it glided through hyperspace, stars streaking by in the distance. Jace lounged in his seat, occasionally glancing over at Lyra, who was still reviewing mission data on her display. The tension between them was palpable, not in the sense of hostility, but more like the quiet before a storm. You know, Jace began, breaking the silence, for someone who's used to luxury, you sure don't mind diving headfirst into trouble. What's the deal? You get tired of sipping champagne on royal yachts and decided you needed a little adrenaline in your life? Lyra didn't look up from her screen, her voice calm and measured. This isn't about adrenaline. It's about duty. Duty, huh? Jace smirked. And here I was thinking you were just doing it for the kicks. Gotta admit, though, you handle yourself better than most people I've seen in the field. Lyra finally glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. Is that supposed to be a compliment? Jace grinned, his tone playful. Take it however you want, sweetheart. Lyra returned her attention to the screen, her expression unreadable. This mission isn't about proving myself to you or anyone else. I do what's necessary. You keep saying that, Jace mused, leaning back in his chair. Necessary. But it seems to me you've got a personal stake in this. You wouldn't be risking your neck just for the good of the galaxy. Lyra's gaze flicked back to him, her expression hard. I'm risking my life because it's the right thing to do. Uh-huh, Jace said, clearly not buying it. And I'm guessing you're going to keep me in the dark about the details? For now, Lyra replied, her voice cool. You'll know what you need to when the time comes. Jace let out a low chuckle. Mysterious as always. You know, one day you'll have to tell me what really drives you. There's more to this story, and I'm going to figure it out. Lyra didn't respond, but Jace could see the tension in her posture. He leaned closer, his voice softening. Whatever it is, you're not alone in this, Lyra. We're in this together. She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her eyes before turning back to her display. Just focus on the mission. Jace grinned, leaning back in his chair again. I always do, Princess. I always do. The moment they stepped foot on Omega Outpost's docking platform, Jace could feel the tension in the air. The outpost was notorious for its high security and even higher risk, a haven for crime lords, smugglers, and worse. The walls were grimy, the air thick with the smell of machinery and oil, and the people? They were the kind who didn't ask questions, as long as you had credits. Home, sweet home, Jace muttered under his breath, his hand never straying far from his blaster. He glanced at Lyra, who seemed as composed as ever. You sure you're ready for this? Omega's not exactly a royal ball. I've handled worse, Lyra replied, her tone cool as always. But Jace noticed her eyes scanning the surroundings with precision. She was on high alert. They moved quickly through the labyrinthine corridors of the outpost, avoiding guards and cameras with practiced ease. Jace's instincts, honed from years of navigating dangerous situations, were tingling. Something wasn't right. "You feel that?" Jace whispered as they ducked behind a stack of crates. "Shouldn't we have hit more resistance by now?" Lyra's brow furrowed, her gaze darting around. "Something's off." Just as she said it, the outpost's alarm blared to life. Red lights flashed across the corridor, and the sound of boots pounding on the metal floor echoed in the distance. "Of course," Jace muttered. "Why does it always have to be a trap?" Lyra's expression hardened. "We've been compromised." "No kidding," Jace said, drawing his blaster. "All right, time to improvise. What's the plan, Princess?" "There is no plan B," Lyra replied, her voice tight. Jace sighed. "Figures. Guess we'll have to do this the fun way." Blaster fire erupted from the end of the corridor as a squad of heavily armed guards rushed toward them. Jace fired back, taking out two before ducking behind cover. Lyra moved beside him, her own blaster in hand. "We need to reach the central chamber. That's where the prisoner is being held." "Easy for you to say," Jace said, popping up to fire a few more shots. "You lead. I'll cover." Without hesitation, Lyra darted forward, her movements swift and graceful. Jace followed close behind, his blaster firing in rapid succession as they pushed through the oncoming wave of guards. The fight through Omega Outpost's narrow halls was brutal, every corner bringing new enemies and fresh danger. But Jace couldn't help himself. Even in the middle of chaos, he found a way to lighten the mood. "You know, for someone who claims to be out of her element, you're doing pretty damn well," Jace called out as they ducked behind another set of crates. "I've had training," Lyra replied, her voice calm despite the situation. She took out two guards with a precise shot before moving to the next cover. Jace raised an eyebrow, grinning despite the blaster fire. "Training, huh? You keep surprising me, Princess." "Keep moving, Donovan," Lyra ordered, firing off another shot as they sprinted down the corridor. They reached the control room, where the person they came to rescue was being held. Lyra moved to disable the security system, her fingers flying over the console. Jace stood guard, his blaster ready. "You sure this guy's worth all this trouble?" Lyra didn't look up. "More than you know." Before Jace could press her further, the door to the room burst open, and a fresh wave of enforcers flooded in. Jace opened fire, taking down the first few with ease, but more kept coming. "We're outnumbered," he shouted. "We need to move now." Lyra's hands moved faster, her focus unbreakable. "Just a few more seconds." "You don't have a few seconds," Jace shot back, taking down another guard. Finally, Lyra managed to disable the system, and the containment field dropped. The prisoner, a figure shrouded in shadows, stepped forward. "Time to go," Lyra called, grabbing the prisoner's arm and pulling them toward the exit. Jace fired one last volley of shots before following them out, his heart pounding as they sprinted toward the docking bay. Back aboard the Eclipse, Jace leaned against the wall, catching his breath. Lyra stood at the controls, guiding the ship out of Omega's territory and into the safety of hyperspace. Once they were clear, Jace turned to her, his expression serious. "All right, we made it. Now you want to tell me what this was really about?" Lyra hesitated, her hands hovering over the controls. "I didn't tell you everything because I knew you wouldn't agree if you knew the full story." "Try me," Jace said, his voice laced with suspicion. Lyra sighed, finally turning to face him. "This isn't just about a prisoner, the person we rescued. They hold information about a biological weapon being developed by the syndicates. If it's unleashed, it could destabilize the entire galaxy." Jace blinked, stunned. "A weapon? And you didn't think that was important enough to mention earlier?" "I was ordered to keep it classified," Lyra replied, her tone tight. "But now that the mission's over, you deserve to know the truth." Jace ran a hand through his hair, letting out a long breath. "Damn it, Lyra. You really know how to pick 'em, don't you?" "I had no choice," she said quietly. "This mission was bigger than both of us." Jace stared at her for a long moment, then finally let out a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Of course, the one time I start to trust someone and they turn out to be hiding a galactic-sized secret." They hadn't made it far before Omega's enforcers caught up with them. Blaster fire lit up the docking bay as Jace and Lyra fought back, their movements perfectly in sync. "This is bad," Jace muttered, firing off a few shots as they ducked behind cover. "We're seriously outnumbered here." "We need to hold them off until the ship's ready to launch," Lyra said, her voice calm despite the chaos. Jace shook his head, grinning despite himself. "You really are something, you know that?" Lyra glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I'm just saying," Jace said, reloading his blaster. "You're not half bad in a fight." Lyra smirked, firing off a few more shots. "I'll take that as a compliment." "You should," Jace replied, his grin widening. "Not everyone can keep up with me." As the ship's engines roared to life, Lyra grabbed Jace's arm, pulling him toward the ramp. "Time to go." Jace followed her, firing a few more shots over his shoulder as they sprinted up the ramp. "You don't have to tell me twice." Once they were safely in hyperspace, Jace slumped into the pilot's seat, letting out a long breath. "Well, that was fun." Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, her expression as composed as ever, though there was a hint of relief in her eyes. "We made it." Jace glanced over at her, a grin spreading across his face. "So, about that dinner?" Lyra raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching ever so slightly. "Dinner? You owe me one," Jace reminded her, leaning back with a satisfied grin. "After everything we've been through? I think it's the least you can do." Lyra shook her head, but there was a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Fine, dinner, but don't expect me to cook." Jace laughed, the sound filling the cockpit. "Wouldn't dream of it, princess. Wouldn't dream of it." As the stars streaked by outside, Jace glanced at Lyra once more, his grin softening into something more genuine. "You know, we make a pretty good team." Lyra met his gaze, her expression unreadable for a moment, before she finally allowed herself a small smile. "Maybe we do." Jace leaned back in his seat, folding his arms behind his head as he stared out at the stars. "I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes." Lyra glanced at him, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Don't get too comfortable, Donovan. There's still work to be done." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Jace said with a wink. As the ship sailed into the vast unknown, both of them knew that while this mission was over, their journey together was just beginning.